Well, welcome to week 18 of our online gathering. There's no way that we could have predicted, I don't think anybody could have really, that 4 months after COVID arose in our country that we would still be gathering in homes. But this is us, this is where we are. I want to invite you as a church family to pray for our elders and our staff in the next few days of this new week. We're a little less than 2 weeks away from August 1 and 2, which is our targeted date to regather here on campus. And we need to make some decisions, whether we hit that date, whether this is the right time or not. And it's actually can be a little foggy as to what exactly to do. There are so many comments, and there's data to think about, there's trends to consider, there's views that different people have on different aspects of whether this is the right time to regather or not, and how to regather, and what the conditions are. And, in the end, as much as those opinions and ideas and the data and trends are part of the decision, it's ultimately we present that to Jesus, and we believe that he actually speaks to us, and he gives us his best, and he gives us his direction. And so, because we're just a couple of weeks away, that's the phase that we're in this next week, to give thought and to make some decisions about what the immediate future looks like. So would you pray with us as we give that some thought? I really think that this is our generation's opportunity, our opportunity to be mistaken for Jesus by how we conduct ourselves, by the message of hope that we have, by a message of compassion that we have for people around us, where we actually prioritize other people over top of ourselves and what our own preference and our own want and wish would be. And these are challenging for us to do that, because we do really have opinions and we do have views. But I'm convinced that in the years ahead that are going to be told of the church in the United States, and maybe around the world for that matter, it's what we do at this season, at this time, how we are hope givers, how we are fearless and compassionate and kind, and we actually remind people of the best thoughts of Jesus that they have. This might just be our moment as a generation to do that very thing, to love in a way that Jesus taught us to love. And that might be a good segue into this next part of what we've been talking about. We've been talking about an idea that Paul, probably the most influential leader in the church in human history, Jesus, of course, the founder, but Paul, so influential in the church and such a fine leader and so clear in terms of his understanding of Jesus and what Jesus thought and taught. And we've been learning from him. He writes some of the most amazing things on the subject of love. And that's where the title comes from, All You Need Is Love, because in one way or another, that really was what Paul talked about when he talked about love in so many different ways. When we started this series, or we had planned this series, COVID wasn't quite a reality in our country yet. We planned some months ahead, actually. And so when COVID happened, we began to ask the question, well, is this still where we should go? And the more that we looked at what Paul had to say and to write about love, we thought, no, this is the perfect subject to think about love through this, because it doesn't take you very long to get into the text of the scripture to read what one of Jesus' closest friends, John, says. He talks about fear and he talks about love, and he says perfect love drives out fear. It does that. And so the heart of this series has been to think about love and to look specifically at an ancient letter that Paul wrote in the first century when the church was just trying to get some traction and just trying to make some difference in the world for Jesus and to be the gospel in the world, to live it out. And a little bit of background to the letter itself, though we're well into the letter. Why background now? But just a little bit of backstory, because I think it really helps with it. Paul's this traveling evangelist that goes around the Roman world and shares the gospel, lives it, talks about it, experiences it with people. And it's not surprising that he would pick Corinth as one of the cities that he would visit. Corinth was the second leading city in the whole Roman Empire, next to Rome itself. And so he goes to Corinth and he starts a church in Corinth. He begins that. He's there for about 18 months, and then he leaves to go to start other churches throughout the Roman Empire. And at some point, things go wrong in the church in Corinth. And Paul writes a letter back to them to encourage them, to direct them. He's responding to some things that he might have seen some hints of when he was there, but it becomes really significant in the aftermath of his departure. And in a way, it's not surprising that some things would go sour or wrong in the church in Corinth, because this community had been formed so strongly by the values of the Roman Empire that I don't know if you've noticed in yourself, if you have come to faith in Jesus a little later in life and you've lived a life in this world, it takes a little bit of time to get the world out of you and to be displaced by the presence of Jesus in us. It's a process. It takes time. It really does. And so it's not surprising that it was a little hard for these new Christians in Corinth to get Rome out of their system and to find a new way to think more and more like Jesus. So here you have this church, barely a year old, maybe a year and a half old, and they're a bit messed up. Paul's concerned that he might lose the whole thing that he started. And that desperately and deeply concerns Paul. So what's he going to do? Well, he has some options. One of the things he could do is simply go, well, that's unfortunate. I'm busy over here now. I'm in Philippi or Ephesus, and, they don't all work out. And he could have just left it at that. Unless you know Paul, that was not going to be a possibility. He could have circled back. He could have visited them. He could have written them kind of a scolding letter that would have said, I'm really disappointed in you. I really am. Like, we had such a good start, and now it's getting all jacked up. And he would have maybe reprimanded them, or maybe even gone so far as to shame them to change their behavior. There are a variety of things that Paul could have done, but see, Paul loves them. He really loves them. And those other options weren't actually anything that he would probably consider. Now, he does send them a letter. But the letter is really a letter of love that overlays the messed up Corinthian church. He names each one of the issues, and he tells them that that is not how love works. It isn't. It's not how love acts. It's not what love looks like. He tells them, you need to take another look at love because, I've noticed some pride in you. I really have. It seems that you're willing to boast about yourselves, and you're willing to boast about even your wrongdoing and how free you are in Jesus, that you can do things that he would never do. And you need to take a look at love again and see if that's what love looks like. He would say things to them like, look, it looks like you are so intent on being seen as right and clinging to your rights that you're actually willing to sue each other in civil court. Go back to love. That's not what love does. You're a little depleted on love if that's what you think you should be doing, and that's normal. He talked to them about how they had such a high regard for their own opinion and such a low regard for other people's opinions. How their own selfishness overcame compassion and consideration for other people. There were some ceremonial food laws that they had, and everybody knew what they were, but some people were so arrogant they just did their own thing, and they ate the food right in front of the people that thought the food shouldn't be eaten. And Paul goes back to them and goes, really? That's not love. That's not love. And he would say that, I've noticed how you're jealous about each other's roles and special abilities to the point where you quit on people, and then you marginalize other people whose gifts you think aren't as significant as your own. Go back to the drawing board of love, because that's not what it looks like. It's as if Paul was saying that all indications are that they're on the wrong side of Jesus and the wrong side of love, and they may not know how they got there. And that's what he says in the first 2/3 of this letter to them. And then he takes a whole section to describe for them what they have experienced in terms of God's love for them. And this is how he begins to describe it. He says, essentially, you can have everything, but if you don't have love, you have nothing. You can know everything. You can be a legend in your own eyes. You can be good at everything. But if you don't love, it doesn't amount to anything. It's nothing. But then thank God that he also writes a letter to some other friends in another church in another Roman city, and he says, but if you personally and increasingly get to know God, like you really get to know him in real time, and you will grasp how long, how high, how deep, how wide his love for you really is. And then when you experience it, though you'll never be able to experience it fully because it's too grand and too great for that, but if you ever do, it's going to so form your love. It's going to make you whole and complete. It's going to make you a lover like Jesus is a lover, and love is going to be taken out of the romantic category and out of the friend category and out of like love for stuff, and it's going to be a whole different kind of love. But you have to experience the love of Christ. And the way you experience it is not by trying, but by living with Jesus. And it becomes part of who you are. And then he writes, here's how you know it's taking hold in your life when you see how you've experienced it through God. He says in verse 4 of chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, love is patient. God is patient. And God is kind. Love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It isn't proud. It isn't rude. It does not demand its own way. It isn't irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. None whatsoever. And if that's what you've experienced, it's because you have known God. And when you know him, that's how you experience his love. And when that takes hold, that's who you become. And then Paul adds this thought, and this is where I want to park on just a little bit today. It's his next thought in terms of describing God's love for us. And if we walk in that love long enough, it takes over, and this is how we love others. He says, God, love, does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. So what does that mean? Well, maybe a couple of other translations or paraphrases might help just a little bit. Here's one from the ESV. Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Here's the RSV. Love does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. And then the Message, a paraphrase, says this: love doesn't revel when others grovel. It takes pleasure in the flowering of truth. Now, I don't know, maybe that's still not clear. It wasn't for me when I read it, and I had to think some more about it and think through. But maybe the context of Paul will help, that Paul's writing it into, might help us understand this a little bit. Because what Paul is writing here is pretty radical for his time. It might be in ours if we fully understand it too. You see, in Paul's world, to rejoice at the failings and faults of others was normal, was typical. It's what you did. And the culture of his day just understood it from the Greek deities that were part of their legends and their spirit expression. The Greek deities, for example, were often depicted as kind of sadist bullies. They were itching for an excuse to inflict suffering on the less powerful, and they would get a kick out of doing it. At the slightest provocation, the Olympian gods might fly into divine wrath that could only be assuaged by putting some unfortunate being in his or her place. And that often happened via bizarre and exemplary punishments that let everyone know exactly who was boss. It's just how it worked. And so the Corinthians learned well from their gods. There was this popular legend, for example, of Sisyphus. Now, he was in their spirit kingdom. He was the king of Corinth, the very city that we're talking about here. And he got Zeus upset one day. There was a standard rule of thumb that within the deities of the Olympic gods, that you were hospitable to travelers who were traveling through the spirit world. Well, Sisyphus didn't cooperate with that. There were some strangers traveling through that world, as the legend goes, the myth goes, and he murdered them. And Zeus got word of that, the god of the gods. And this is what he did to Sisyphus. He made him roll a rock up a hill, and let it fall back down, and roll it back up again and let it fall. And that was his eternal punishment for what he had done. And it was just clear. Wrongdoing always got avenged in some kind of way. So culturally, the Corinthians worked under this kind of system. If someone messed something up, that indicated a weakness, and while the right thing to do was to rejoice because of their failure, because it presented an opportunity for you to take advantage of them and their failure. And Paul comes along And he simply says this: that's not how God does things. That's not what his love looks like. When you and I, as his children, mess up, he does not see that as an opportunity to rejoice, but rather as an opportunity to love and bring love-saturated truth to bear. Here, look, maybe this is going to help explain a little bit better. Of all the people in the world, I think Elfie has demonstrated Christ-like love to me, as I think of it, more than any other person. But as a person that would run really close to that would be my mom. I think my mom has demonstrated what Jesus' love looks like. And, you know, many of you can relate to that kind of love of a mother. Now, I know there are some that don't, because, well, because of family breakup, you never really experienced maybe the love of a mom, or maybe because of illness, or maybe just lost your mom early in life, and you don't know exactly. But for me, my mom demonstrated the love of Christ. There are a lot of memories that I can think of where my mom demonstrated that, but there's one in particular that's come to my mind over and over again repeatedly these last several months. And here's what it is. I think it was about 7 or 8 years old. I don't know exactly, but as best I can recall, our family lived in a rural setting, a town of about 150 or so people, and the school that I went to, the elementary school, the 1st through 8th grade, was about 2 miles away from us. It was kind of like a Little House on the Prairie scene, 2-room schoolhouse, 4 grades in each one. And but that was my experience as a young boy. And the typical for us was to walk to school or ride to school on a bike. Very seldom did we get a ride with parents or carpool, that kind of thing, and we didn't have bus service. So we would walk the 2 miles to and from school. Well, on one particular occasion, I had just gotten home from the 2-mile walk, and in our home, the rule of our family was that when you got home from school, you did homework before you went out to play with your friends. You just had to do homework. So I got home, went to my bedroom, and was going to start with my homework, and then there I saw it on the edge of my toy box beside my bed was a coin. It was a quarter. And I took a little closer look, and sure enough, it's a quarter. And for a 7 or 8-year-old little boy growing up in the 60s, that was a big deal. If you take the inflation index, that's worth about $1.95 today. But for me, that was 2.5 times my weekly income. I got a 10-cent allowance every week from my parents. But this was 2.5 times that. And I instantly had pictures of me going down to the corner store and buying black licorice. I loved black licorice, and that's just what I saw doing it. And it was a big deal for me. So I was super excited with this. I was rich finally. I ran out of my room. I ran to my mom, who was in the kitchen, and I excitedly told her that I had found this coin. She seemed to be excited with me. And then she asked me the fateful question that would turn my afternoon around. She turned to me and asked where I had found it. And I froze. I didn't know what to say. Here I was as a little 8-year-old kid, and I had this horrible thought. If I tell my mom that I found it on the edge of my toy box, she is going to know that it was either hers or Dad's, and they dropped it in my room, and they would want it back. Of course they would want it back. I didn't want to give it back. Worst thought for me was this, that my older sister owned it, and she dropped it, and I would have to give it back to her. And that was unthinkable to me. So I did the only reasonable thing that you can do in that moment. I lied. Yeah, I lied. I quickly regathered myself with her question, and I nonchalantly told her, oh, I'd found it on the ground on the way home from school. My reasoning was that if I could pull off that con and convince her that that was the case, there was no way to find the original owner. I would be able to keep it. I'd be home free, and off to the store we go. Well, suddenly, of all things, my mom turns into this interrogating detective. She wants to know exactly where I found it. She wants to know, well, how did you spot it? Was there anybody with you when you found it? And to my surprise, my quick thinking little 8-year-old mind was able to come up with really credible answers to these good questions, and all on the fly. And I was sure I was fooling her. And then for some reason, she asked the question again. Are you sure that you found it on the way home from school? And I'm thinking, the way that she asked it is, maybe she knows. But I wasn't going to give in at this point, so I pressed on with the lie, and I said, yeah, well, for sure, of course. I found it along the pathway next to the fence line behind Lawrence Penner's home. It was right there on the ground. I picked it up. I was so excited. I ran home with it. Yeah, I know that's where I found it, Mom. And my mom asked me again, the oddest thing. This time with piercing eyes that were both gentle and able to detect lies. She asked again, are you absolutely sure that you found it on the ground? I was a little stuck, so I thought, what am I going to say? And I came up with another idea. Let's defer. So I said, hey, look, I have homework to do in my bedroom. I need to go take care of that right now. I know I can't go out and play till I get the homework done. Well, my mom's not an easy make. So she asked me now for the third time if I was sure that I had found the coin on the ground. And it was just enough. I broke. She absolutely broke me with her relentless interrogation. I spilled my guts. I blew the whistle on myself. I sold myself down the river, whatever you want to call it. I absolutely came clean with the truth and the fact that I had indeed found the coin, not on the path, but I had found it on the corner of my toy box. And by now, by the time I get to that, I'm crying and I'm confessing and I'm pleading guilty and I'm begging for leniency. And I tell the whole sordid story. I fall on the mercy of the court. And I don't care anymore about keeping the coin. I don't even want the coin anymore. I just want to get out of there so I'm not punished and get sent away for lying. You see, to lie in our family was a really serious offense. And then my mom said to me that I was to give her the coin, was to go to my room, wait for her. She would be down to see me in a little bit. And I knew that I was in deep, deep trouble. And I couldn't believe it. Here she was sending me back to the scene of the crime. But eager to comply, in an effort to mitigate kind of the punishment I knew inevitably that was coming, I quickly went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed waiting patiently for the end to come. And in the silence of my room, it wasn't very long before guilt turned to shame, and then shame to anger. And I was so frustrated with myself that I had let this happen. Why hadn't I just simply said, I found it on the edge of my toy box, and maybe I would have kept it, maybe not, but I for sure wouldn't be in this predicament that I am now. And how could I have been so stupid to do this? How could I lie repeatedly? I sat there for what felt like hours, and then I heard the steps of my executioner. The doorknob turned, and in walked my mom, and I looked down. I was too ashamed to look up at her. I knew that I'd broken her heart, and I felt bad about lying to her, and I felt ashamed as a person. My mom came and sat beside me for a few minutes, we just sat silently next to each other. And then finally she spoke up, and she asked this question, do you know why I kept asking you where you had found the quarter? I wasn't sure. I shook my head, fighting back tears, and she said, the reason I kept asking that is because I was the one that put the quarter on the edge of your toy box. I was vacuuming your room earlier in the day, and I came across it, and I thought it was yours. And I wanted to be sure that you got it back, and so I put it there, making sure that you would find it after school. And then she did this amazing thing. She handed me the coin. She gave it to me, and she told me she was giving it back to me to keep because she really wanted me to have it. And then she said this, Bradley, it's always wrong to lie. Always. Not only do we not do that in our family, but Jesus never lied. Not even when it meant pain for him. And I thought, oh goodness, now I've got Jesus on my back too. I'm sure she said a few more things, but I don't really recall what they were. And in the end, she asked if I had anything to say. And I said, well, yeah, I do. I wanted so badly to tell her that I was sorry, and so I said sorry in the best way that I could. I told her I was sorry I had lied to her and broken her trust in me, and I asked if she would forgive me, and she did that eagerly. And she asked if she could hug me, and I did that eagerly. And then she did one more thing that I'll never forget, and I think it's maybe this more than anything that reminds me of this story. She reached over to the Bible that was also on the toy box beside my bed. And she said she wanted to read a verse from the Bible for me. In fact, she wanted me to memorize it and asked me to stay in my room till I had memorized it. So she read it to me to help me understand it a little bit, and so I could actually memorize it correctly. And so for the next while, I worked at memorizing this verse of Scripture. I don't know how long it took, but eventually I came out and I recited it to her. It's the first Bible verse that I ever remember. It's the first verse I ever memorized and put in my mind, in my heart. And I can't tell you the number of times I've recited it back to myself over the years and how many times I've shared it with other people. The passage, the verse that she gave me to memorize is Romans 12:21. It says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." So, how exactly does that shed light on love does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out? You see, my mom is an expression of love. And my mom did not rejoice with the failure that I had, in spite of it was her directly that was hurt by it. She did not sweep it under the carpet or minimize it or just blow it off as something that was just a child's game or, kids will be kids. No, she loved me too much for that. But you know what else she didn't do? She didn't do this. She didn't wring her hands in glee with the thought of teaching me a lesson and making me pay her back for lying to her. She didn't call her friends and then tell them that her 8-year-old son was a liar and deceiver. She didn't do that. She did not go on social media and tell everyone who would listen that she had just caught her son red-handed and used that as a platform to shame me into changing my behavior. She also didn't do this. The next time that she got together with her friends, she did not say, "Hey, don't tell anybody this, and I'm not gossiping. I just think you should know this. My son is a chronic liar." Of course, she didn't do that. A mom wouldn't do that. Why wouldn't a mom do that? Because a mom loves. It's love that fuels that. She loved me too much to publicly shame and humiliate me or rejoice about the bad that I had done. That's the power of love. And yet, without a second thought, we jump on social media and have conversation with friends and verbally destroy and malign and shame people who disagree with us over the littlest of things. That seems so big to us, but in the whole scope of things, they're so little. And yet we're eager to jump on social media and malign them. We're eager to do that with people who differ from us in political views. We'll do it with people when they have a different preference of wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, regathering as a church immediately or waiting for some time where it's safer. And we say these personal, derogatory, demeaning things to one another as if we don't love each other. And when we do that, we are on the wrong side of love and the wrong side of Jesus. When we find ourselves rejoicing when a political foe or opponent fails, that's not love. Or we wish something bad to happen to someone who disagrees with us. Just earlier this week, I was in line at a checkout and two friends, I think they were friends, they were talking back and forth about how serious this COVID-19 epidemic is. And they were so disappointed in a political leader nationally, and they named this person, how he didn't take it seriously. And then one of the people said to the other friend, said, "I hope he gets it so he understands how serious it is." That is not love. It's not. To hold that in one's heart is not love. And it isn't love when there's somebody at work or in our family or our neighborhood who we really don't like all that much. And then they fail at something, or they get embarrassed by something they do, or they mess something up, they get in trouble. And in our hearts, we kind of rejoice, or, they deserved it, or it serves them right. We might even just do it secretly, but we find some satisfaction in that. Do not expect Jesus to stand up and cheer when that happens. Why? Because not once, not a single time, has he ever treated you and me like that when we've messed something up. when we've done something wrong, when we have had an opinion that's totally contrary to him, where we have stood on some truth that isn't truth at all. He just doesn't treat us like that. His answer to our mess-ups and differing opinions and failures and embarrassment is not to rejoice or shame or to gloat or to say, I told you so, or post something on social media, but it is to love. And for him to love means this, to leave his kingship and his glory behind in heaven, to condescend, to come to this world, to humanize himself, to live in our place, and then to submit to us and let us do horrible, unspeakable things to him, ending with him on a cross. And it's fueled by love for us. He doesn't shame us. He doesn't condemn us. He doesn't condone it, but he is filled with grace and goodness. It's driven by an unfathomable love for us. We do not operate by the values of this culture. We cannot. We cannot cancel people. We cannot shame people. We cannot mock people. Love will not let us do that. And if we are doing it, we are not overtaken by love, and love is not the operating system that we are operating by. So be careful what you post. Be careful what you say about others. Do not mock. Do not make fun of. Do not ridicule. Even if the person in your view is dead wrong. Now, hold on just a second. Does that mean that we remain silent in the face of untruth and lies and false messaging? No. Listen to what Paul writes. He says, love rejoices whenever truth wins out. And what does that mean? Well, go back to my mom for a second. She was not going to leave my lying alone. She loved me too much. But when she did talk to me about it, she confronted me with the truth in the tender-hearted love of a mom. She made the hard truth beautiful, because truth is always beautiful. It's hard, it's painful at times, but it's always hopeful and it's always beautiful. We can and we must be people who speak the truth, but before we open our mouths to speak it, might we be willing to ask some self-examination questions, to dig a little deeper below the truth, to discover why we're telling it the way we're telling it and doing it the way we're doing it? Could we maybe ask a few of these questions? Is the truth or that I'm about to trumpet, is it true truth, or is it my perspective on truth, my version of truth? Is it really true? Another one, could I maybe ask a couple of questions of the other person before I jump in and speak my truth? Could I discover what their truth is? Here's something we could do. Could ask, am I pointing this out to be helpful and loving, or to be right and to put the other person in their place? Is that my motive behind it? Maybe this. Is it possible for me to say what I want to say with kindness and with respect? Or do I just have to dive in and say it? Could I wait? And if I can't wait, maybe that's exactly what I need to do, is wait. Paul is going to write to this group of Jesus followers in Corinth at least one more time. And as direct as he is in this letter that we're reading from now, there's another one where he's even more direct, really direct, because they've questioned Paul directly about himself. However, here's the interesting thing. Partway through his direct conversation with them, he says this to them in 2 Corinthians 2:4. He says, I wrote you not to bring you sorrow. Truth sometimes brings sorrow. But I wrote it. I didn't want you to be sorrowful. I wrote it because I love you. I wrote it out of love. I wrote it tenderly, directly, kindly, but I did it with a motive of love. Jesus says in John 13:34, he says, the world around is going to look at us as followers of Jesus who claim to have experienced his love and live in his love and are the model of love in this world to represent him. They're going to look at us and they're going to decide whether he is worthy to follow and his love is real by how Our love is real for one another. And so when we malign each other, when we send out social media posts that others who don't follow Jesus yet watch and read, they equate how we do things with how Jesus does things. And we're meant to represent his love because we have been so profoundly impacted by his love for us that we in turn love other people that way. And again, I say, if that isn't working for you, don't try to love more. Get to know the love of Jesus yourself. Live in it. Mess a few things up and see how he responds to you. Have a few wrong opinions and don't tell the truth and see how he deals with you. And watch how his love works in you. And that's how it's meant to work in other lives around us. And you know, when you and I live that kind of love life, see, that's not romantic love. That's not soft love. That is bold, hard, real, genuine love. And when we live that way, our lives actually become a blessing in this world. I said earlier on that this is our generation's opportunity to be mistaken for Jesus. Jesus is a blessing kind of God. To bless means to will the good of someone. He wills our good. It's what he does. And when he wills our good and we experience his love, it's meant for us to will the good of others and be a blessing as he is to us. We sing a song around here frequently. It's quoted directly from an Old Testament passage that speaks about the blessing of God, the willing of good by God for us. We're going to sing that together, and it would be my prayer that we would live under that blessing, that we would take it and receive it and live under the joy of that, but it would have an effect on us, that we would live lives of blessing around us, that we would be people of grace, of goodness, of truth, and of love. May it be so as we do this together. Now, Jesus, you know us. You know that things happen in our life and in our world that upset us and confuse us and make us frustrated and angry at times. And living that life of love, it's actually a challenge for us. But may we be among those who say that's not what you define as love. May we look your way, learn of your love, look at how you love us. When we mess up and we jack stuff up and we sin, what you do in your love for us, you always tell us the truth in love, and you never mock us when we mess it up one more time. You bless us, Jesus. You are a God of blessing, and we want to be a blessing back to our world. Help us to that end now, Jesus. Amen.